just the nature of my job is I move every 3 years. Okay, like clockwork. If you take every year since 2000, every year divisible by three, I have moved. Okay, 2003, 6, 9, 12, and maybe actually a couple years in between those as well. But I'm moving every 2 to 3 years, and everybody in the Marine Corps is typically moving every 2 to 3 years. So there's a lot of people that I was once close with that we've kind of lost contact with, because maybe I was in San Diego and they moved to the DC area and I moved to North Carolina or something like that. But the other thing that would happen is a lot of people that I haven't seen in many years have kind of crawled out of the woodworks and said, "Hey, I've seen you post about investing in apartments. I'm interested." And, a lot of former colleagues or, Marines that I've worked with at different duty stations have invested with us because they've seen that shift.
This is the real estate investing experience. We get it. Real estate can be rough sometimes, and that's why we bring in the experts to talk about the experiences you won't hear anywhere else with your hosts, John Cohen and Chris Grinzik.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Real Estate Investing Experience. I'm your host, Chris Grinzik, and with me, as always, is John Cohen. How's it going, bud?
We're good. We're rolling. We wrapping up some BOVs on some properties, and we're probably going to go to market with a couple of them. See how this market plays itself out. We've owned the deals, we've executed what we've needed to, and we're the best sellers in the world. It's hit my price, or we're going to refinance. So hopefully, by the time someone listens to this, they don't know that, but basically their motivation is pricing. So sharpen your pencils, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to put that out there. You're going to be getting a ton of phone calls from debt providers and brokers trying to figure out what deal they can either put some new debt on or sell for you. So I don't know if that's the smartest thing you've ever done in the world.
We are going to screen our calls aggressively, right? We will not answer anything and let everything go to voicemail, and we'll see how it shakes out. But no, we're excited because we've gone full cycle on a couple deals. Throughout, COVID, right? This property went through a major renovation in the midst of everything. So it would be a really nice win. It'd be a nice win, right? Bought before COVID, executed through COVID, sold at way higher than expectations. So we're excited to see it through and or refinance, right? We're not gonna be particular here. We're just gonna look for, put a win on the board, see if we can buy something else and do it again.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it makes a lot of sense, and I think going full cycle on a deal is a really interesting process, especially for like one of the first times. Obviously once you do it a few times, it kind of changes, but I remember going full cycle on a couple of deals the first times, and it's pretty crazy just to all of a sudden have that wire hit your bank account. And, you've got to send some of that to investors and different people and stuff, but it's still pretty cool. When you buy a deal, right, you have money come in and you send it out, and this way it's the opposite. It's like, oh, I just got a bunch of money. So it's pretty surreal. I don't know about you, but the first time or two is a little anticlimactic because it's like nothing really happens. Like you just get a bunch of money and that's kind of it, which sounds crazy, but I don't know, maybe I just didn't celebrate it hard enough, but I don't know. It's pretty cool to see a deal go full cycle.
No, I think you're right? The sell is a lot easier than the buy, right? How many times in the office did we speak about it where on the buy side, it's like, guys, let's document this and see if we can get a better process. Because it feels like the wheels come off the bus the day of closing or the day before, where the title company's short 50 or, and you're sending another wire, and it just, the other side is easy, right? You sign a document, you approve it, and next thing you know, you wait for that big check, that big wire to hit. And then, it's investor relations. So I agree with that, the celebrations aside, right? But the buy side seems to be more fun. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I'm excited to see it. Even though I'm not working on them now, obviously spent a lot of time on them. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens in that project, and also to see what, my money as an investment will do. So
there you
excited to now I'm just purely an investor. So you're going to be hearing some pretty tough questions from my end about what's actually going on. So you better prepare yourself.
Instead of you answering the questions, you're going to be the one giving it to us a little bit.
Exactly, right? And I know where all the bodies are, so I know what questions.
Exactly. You know where all the skeletons in the closet are. Like, wait, I don't want to hear that answer. I want to hear this one.
Exactly. Yeah. No, for sure. But it's all good stuff. So excited to see what happens. Guys, definitely stay tuned. We'll keep you updated as that goes through. And If there's any interesting insights, we'll have to hear them from you. But let's jump into today's episode. We got a great guest on today. I was on his podcast not too long ago and had a great time. So really excited to have him on, hear his story, learn from him, get his insights. So with that being said, Brian, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks a lot. I appreciate you guys' time today.
You got it. So kick us off a few minutes. Tell everybody who you are, a little bit about you, your journey in real estate and what you do.
Yeah, I think the most recognizable thing, a lot of people, can at least relate to this or imagine. I've been active duty in the Marine Corps for 19 and a half years now. So I've got roughly 121 days until I retire. Could be to the day, maybe I'm a day or two off, but, in a nutshell, I was born and raised in the Salt Lake City, Utah area. Ended up going to graduate school at the University of Minnesota. And when the World Trade Center, Pentagon terrorist attacks happened back in 2001, I decided to go active duty, So my official retirement date, no coincidence, is going to be, 20 years and 1 month after September 11th. But didn't really imagine that I'd go 20, but somewhere along the line, I decided to start picking up single family real estate. Ended up with several properties, and at one point, realized that if I wanted to scale, I had to do something besides single family, which I think the natural progression for that is multifamily. Kind of look at it, and I've heard many people say this, and I've said it many times in the past. It's almost like you buy a 50 unit, and it's more like a buy one get 49 free sale, because the process of purchasing a multifamily property, if it's a 50 unit, it's not 50 times as hard as purchasing a single unit, which was the big mountain that I was staring at, having to get over to be able to get to my number on single family homes to be able to be financially free. But at the end of the day, like a lot of people in this industry, I got some formalized coaching, spent a couple of years, learning about the business and ramping up. And, right now, with my partners at Four Oaks Capital, we have roughly 500 units in the Southeast, primarily South Carolina and Georgia. And, we're always working on acquiring more. So that's where we're at. And then you also mentioned the podcast that you were on as well, Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast. And I think that's very unique in a way, because we bring an experienced guest, an inspiring guest on every single show. I think we had you lined up with Han O, right? Was that?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So, incidentally, he reached out to me a couple of days ago. They're putting LOIs in on properties right now. So
nice.
He's taking a couple steps forward. But the podcast allows the aspiring investors, the beginning investors, a chance to ask people who are more experienced, what they would do and what they should do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I really enjoyed your podcast. I think the premise is interesting and different. So definitely encourage everyone to go check it out. If you want to go start with mine, feel free. I forget what episode it is, but I think the premise is really interesting. I think people get a lot out of it. So, definitely enjoyed doing it.
Yeah, I'll send you a specific link to the episode, and if you put in the show notes, I think that'd make it easier.
Yeah, for sure.
That works. So
yeah, we'll definitely include that. I think what's really interesting, and it goes back to a point John made on our last recording. We had a buddy of mine that kind of did like an internship for us a couple of years ago. One of the comments he made was like, you guys toss around 20, 30, $50 million like it's no big deal. And you just touched on saying, 50 unit deal versus one single family is not 50 times the work. I think that's really interesting as people scale up that, you hear about these much larger deals and these much larger numbers, and you're like, oh my God, how does anybody ever own 200 million, 100 million, $1 billion worth of real estate and, not freak out? And I think you said like that natural progression from, 1 to 50 or 1 to 500 or 1 to 5,000, like you said, the work isn't crazy different. It's not a linear amount of extra work.
And the system is actually set up against going from 1 to 1,000, right? If all you have is a couple of single family homes, you're going to have an extremely difficult time, jumping into the 100 million plus, arena, so there's a lot of requirements. The lenders are going to require experience and net worth and liquidity. And there's a big hurdle to get over to get in. So I think what most people do is they start with something a little more reasonable, So our first deal was a 55 unit, which, I mean, some people may look at that as insurmountable, but when you really look at it, it's most people, when they come in from the single family realm, they're looking at something between 20 and 50 units. $1-2-3 million purchase price is their first deal, which isn't that big of a leap when you think about it. But end of the day, it took me a lot of time to kind of get used to those larger numbers. A lot of underwriting properties and a lot of talking to people before. A $4 million property sounded like didn't sound like it was a crazy, ridiculous amount. Mm-hmm. And I think through the process, I've got a much different idea now on what's a large amount of money versus, what's something that's less large. So the $50,000 minimum investment that we require used to seem like a big number to me, but now it's, I realize it's actually accessible for a lot of people. And when I talk to most people and, hey, is $50,000 something you guys can invest? The answer almost always is, yeah, sure, we can hit that. So anyway, that's kind of my thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I think I remember, one of the first deals, and it goes back to going, full cycle on a deal, was we did an 82 unit down here in Jacksonville, Florida. It's one of the first deals I did with John. And I remember thinking, oh my God, it was like $3.8 million. And I was like, oh my God, that's so much money. Like, it's this massive deal and all this stuff. And I'm looking at the numbers because, we went from we were looking at single family, then we did an 8 unit and a 17 unit with John. And I was like $600,000. And we basically 10x'd up to that. And we were like, holy shit. But now I look at it, I'm like, okay, like a $3 million deal is nothing. Now, conversely, as I've gone off my own, started the property management stuff, I purposefully took a pretty large step down to allow myself to get my feet underneath me on the operations and property management side. But like the dollars and numbers to me, it's like, I don't know, it's just second nature now. So it's pretty interesting as you start working your way up and working with bigger numbers, and you also surround yourself with people that are used to those bigger numbers, how second nature becomes very quickly.
Yeah. And something about that, I remember, underwriting a property once, and this is over 2 years ago when this happened. I'd already met one of my partners, Eric Shirley. We hadn't like formalized our partnership yet, but we had started collaborating on deals. And I remember he started talking about a $6 million property. And that number to me was just so high that, my brain came to a screeching halt. It was just like, 6 million. I'm like, there's no way we can get a 6 million, 25% down plus, closing costs plus everything else. I mean, that's like a $2 million raise. And to me, that I remember that number just seemed so big and so foreign, and the last one we closed was a $4 million raise, $7+ million purchase price. I think all in we were at, 9 and change, as far as, what we put into the deal. But yeah, I mean, 2 years, I went from 6 million being just gigantic number to we raised 4 million and, purchased a $7.5 million property.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think the important thing that a lot of people realize, and why I think going from like 1 to 20 is different, but going from like 20 to 200 is not so different in terms of units or even dollars, to be perfectly honest. The same mechanics on a 20 unit property is almost identical to what you're going to do on a 200 unit property to a certain degree, right? I would say 80-90% of it is going to be the same. And I think, you're just adding some zeros and some dollars. And I think things probably move a little bit slower too on 20 versus 200 because, it is just more units. It's tougher to get, if you wanted to renovate 20 units in 3 months, you could probably do it. You want to renovate 200 in 3 months, you're probably going to run into some problems. So
you're going to have to hire a lot of construction crews and,
exactly. Now, could you do it? Probably yes. But, there is some difference in it. But the basic foundational mechanics in operating and running a 20 unit versus a 200 unit are very, very correlated, largely almost the same. And I think that's what, once people start doing it for a decent amount of time, whether it's 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years, everybody's different. That progression to getting a little bit bigger and bigger and, kind of finding your feet of what your size is eventually doesn't become overly difficult.
Yeah, and we looked at it as kind of a progression. I think we always wanted to live in the 150 plus, 200 unit plus realm, but like I said, at first it seemed insurmountable, and so we started closing. First property, the first indication we did was it was two properties that were sold together. A 16 unit and a 39 unit. And by themselves, those are pretty small properties. The next property was a 33 unit. The next property was 80. So you kind of look at our progression, and I think, there's different opinions on the process, but I think starting a little smaller and getting your internal procedures ironed out is a smart way to go. I've heard other people say, if you want to be in the 100 to 200 unit mix, just start there, which it can happen. I think it requires a lot more preparation, but there's something to be said about starting a little bit smaller, with smaller dollar amounts, getting your system set up so that when you get into those larger and larger deals, it's just like you said, the process isn't a lot different, between the 20 unit and the 200 unit. Just now that you're used to the 20, it's really easy to step into that 200.
Yeah, 100%. So what do you think, as you've kind of gone through this process over the past couple of years, what do you think some of the bigger things that you've learned that have helped you kind of scale up into some of those larger deals coming from that single family world that were extremely helpful?
Looking back at it, I think at first I kind of scoffed at any of these little mindset things. I was the guy that took the Think and Grow Rich book and threw it across the room after reading the first chapter, and this it was a long time ago. But, looking back at my progression, there were several mindset shifts, paradigm shifts that I went through that were absolutely crucial to getting to where I was, and the first one was, team. I was trying to do it by myself. And then I realized that, hey, if I had other people around me to help, I could chase something that's a little larger. I was initially looking at like the 6, 8, and 10 units. And my original plan was, okay, this is how much capital I have. I can sell a couple of single family properties and maybe get up to this amount, and I started backwards planning based off of how much capital I could bring to the table. And that looked like a 6 or an 8 unit property, and the plan was, maybe hold it for a year or two, try to, try to get established track record, and then I could potentially pursue a syndication. But in my mind, it was all me by myself. And one of the first breakthroughs was just realizing that I could partner with other people. And I think a lot of that was that I could add value to other people. And a couple other, big breakthroughs I had were, more along the lines of, my identity actually matters. I think being an active duty Marine and calling people up, when people would ask me, when I go to conferences, I'd introduce myself as, hey, my name's Brian, I'm an active duty Marine. Because that was kind of like tied to my identity, or my identity was tied to that fact of being active duty. And I realized really quickly that if other people saw me as Brian the Marine, that they were not going to invest their money with me. All right. So the next mindset shift that I think I had to go through was I had to believe that I was Brian the apartment investor before I could get other people. But, along the way, there's just several, mindset shifts that I had between, I can maybe do this 4 or 6 unit to, yeah, we can hit this $4 million property, or yeah, we can buy this, $7.5 million property and actually get it across the finish line.
Mm-hmm. So I think you touched on something really interesting that I bet a lot of people struggle with is like, a lot of people don't start super early in real estate and they have a job or they do something else and they transition over. Mm-hmm. How do you shift that mindset into from, hey, I'm an accountant, hey, I'm active duty Marine, hey, I am an engineer, to, hey, I buy and invest in real estate and I'm a real estate guy and an investor?
Yeah. For me, it was, I didn't put a lot of effort into changing my mindset until I realized that it was stopping me. When I would talk to people about investing and they'd ask the question, well, aren't you a Marine? When did you retire? When did you get out of the Marine Corps? I'm like, well, I'm still doing that, when I started realizing that, I started out by literally just changing all my social media profiles, instead of on LinkedIn saying, Brian Briscoe, Marine Corps officer, I put Brian Briscoe, apartment investor, and that was really the first thing. And then, it took me a while just to get used to the idea, but as I talked about it more and as I, got more, little successes under my belt, we got the first LOI signed and then the first contract signed. And then, we started raising money and closing on the first property. It was a process over several months where I really gained my confidence in my ability to actually be an apartment investor. Prior to, even putting the words apartment investor on my LinkedIn profile, it was kind of a leap of faith. It was just like, am I really? Is somebody going to call me out on this because we own 0 apartments? But it was just a slow process. And, I think if I had to do it over again, I think I would have been a little more deliberate about, trying to shift my mindset, trying to gain that confidence, earlier. And, it may have sped things up for us, or it may have just made that first deal a little more easy. But end of the day, I think that was definitely something that was key in my trajectory.
Mm-hmm. When you were doing that, did you run into the thought process or anything like that of, hey, my current circle of people is going to see these things and it's going to be uncomfortable? Like, I don't know if you have Marine buddies or family or other friends that like, hey, they've just known Brian as the Marine guy for 15 years or whatever it is. And now all of a sudden he's changing his identity, and you were fearful or worried of how people were going to see you or what they thought of you, or you're going to, lose those relationships. Was that on your mind a lot while you were doing that?
I wasn't worried about necessarily losing the relationships. I think most people who knew me well knew that I had, the single family properties, because I talked about those a lot. But I think what I was more fearful of is telling everybody that I was an apartment investor and then not ever becoming an apartment investor. Mm-hmm. All right. I was more fearful of failing and having to explain, well, yeah, I tried that apartment investing thing. It just didn't work for me. That's really what I was afraid of. I think being successful was what I wanted. And I wasn't worried about, how people looked at me. I mean, eventually, I think, like I said, I had tied my identity to being a Marine for so long that I also had to have another mindset shift. And this happened, 3-4 years ago, where I had to sit down and really think about it. I'm like, I've got 16, 17 years under my belt. There's going to come a time when the Marine Corps is going to tell me, you're too old for this. Thanks for playing. Mm-hmm. And I think at first what I really started realizing is, in the next 3 to 5 to 8 years, I'm going to have to do something else. And that's what kind of got the ball rolling as far as the identity. Maybe I had a mini identity crisis or whatever, but getting that mindset shift in my own head first. But I realized that I would eventually have to go through it. And I just decided, why not now before I retire, so I don't have to deal with the, oh my goodness, I've been a Marine for 20 years and now I'm not. What do I do now? And having to deal with that, just right when I retire. Mm-hmm. So.
No, I think that's great, because I know, it's a little bit of like the imposter syndrome type thing, mm-hmm. where, you want to be something or do something. Well, there's at some stage, you've got to decide that you are that person, or you are going to do it before you actually do it. And it's, mm-hmm. It's a scary time when anybody's doing it. And I think putting it out there into the world, it's a really funny thing, because mm-hmm. Everybody gets so caught up in their own lives that you're like, oh, if I put this out there, everybody's going to notice and like judge me. And it's like,
yeah,
nobody's paying attention to you. Everybody's paying attention to their own thing. So I think it's a really funny thing, but it's like,
so true.
it's like actually really powerful to put it out there. You know, like one of the things that I've talked about is like, you know, my 10-year vision is to get to 500 million under management. I'm really putting it out there for myself, and you know, I'm probably going to miss it one way or the other. Like I'm either going to miss it under or over, right? That the chances that I hit 500 on the nose or within a couple
or
percent
zero.
is going to be, it's going to be very low. You know, I hope it goes higher, but like I have the humility to be like, okay, if I just miss it or I decide to come in underneath it, like I don't care. And if everybody in the world came out 10 years from now and said, oh, you missed it, I wouldn't care. But I know the reality is nobody's going to give a shit. Nobody's going to come knocking or calling, and nobody's going to, you know, look at it from here was your day one, and this is exactly 10 years later. Like nobody's going to care. So I think, you know, kind of stating your, you know, an identity change or stating a goal and putting it out there. Yeah, you'll have, you know, maybe some people notice, but it's probably only going to be the people that are closest to you. And they're probably going to be the most likely to not say anything or be supportive if and when you don't hit it or miss it anyway. So I think you going out there and putting Apartment Investor in your LinkedIn, the random person that saw it might have been like, that's funny or that's silly, but it's actually super powerful and probably was the first domino that knocked over many subsequent dominoes to get you to where you are today.
Yeah. And now on occasion, people, you know, who meet me and maybe have had one or two phone conversations with me, you know, later on they find out, oh, I didn't know you were active duty. So I'm getting the opposite now, which is nice in a lot of ways. You know, oh, I didn't know you're active duty. And, you know, like 121 days from now, it's going to be, oh, I didn't know you were active duty one time. But, you know, anyway, if you haven't noticed, I'm looking forward to actually retiring. So,
yeah, not counting down the days or anything. I was, John, before you chime in, I was going to say, I already knew your background, but I was kind of like refreshing in my head as you were talking. I was like, oh yeah, I forgot he's active Marine. Like, cause I see your name all the time. And I think, you know, Brian is Four Oaks Capital and he does apartments and all that stuff. And like, I forget that you are, you know, obviously I didn't know it was 121 days. And, you know, I'm sure I knew last time we spoke, but like, that's the power of it. Like I actually had forgotten until you mentioned it again.
Yeah. Last we spoke, it was probably 300 and something.
Yeah, exactly.
It's actually been a while. So
yeah, it's been several months, but it's a really good point.
Yeah. John, you were about to say something.
What I was going to say is, to that exact point, right? Making this minor change to Apartment Investor, and to Chris's point, by doing that, you probably get more people that want to approach you as, hey, what do you know about apartments? Or, hey, what can what are you looking for? Can you help me? Or I have a question for you, than hiding behind, you know, faking it till you're making it, right? Like putting that out there, friends, people, all your contacts now see it. And then that's the tool that you use to, you know, make that shift. So I tell people all the time, and I think Chris can speak to this, the first deal that, you know, we did together was that 82 unit. And I kept telling everybody for way before we bought it, you know, start today for the deal you have in 12 months. Because when you have that deal, if you haven't put the foundation down, you're automatically behind the eight ball. So that fear of starting or scared, and I know people are in different situations at work, but I'm sure that one change, maybe it helped you, you know, mentally to feel better at conferences, but it also probably changed the appearance to outsiders looking in. Yeah. You know, that's a very noticeable change, you know, especially in the world of social media today, where, you know, you make a change like that to a profile, anyone that basically cares or follows you or sees that makes that, oh, what do you know, I've always been interested in that. And then you can use that and you can script your story to the people that are reaching out to you as a warmer introduction than a straight cold out of the box knowing nothing. So, you know, little things like that, mindset aside, are things anyone listening to that knows nothing about real estate, wants to get into real estate, or super experienced and hasn't made that change, that domino in itself can lead to deals, investors, whatever. So I think that minor change makes a world of difference. If that's the only thing you did today and you took that action, you're probably setting yourself up for a much quicker result than holding back.
And I'll tell you what, I mean, just the nature of my job is I move every 3 years. Okay. Like clockwork. You know, if you take every year since 2000, every year divisible by 3, I have moved. Okay, 2003, 6, 9, 12, and maybe actually a couple of years in between those as well. But I'm moving every 2 to 3 years, and everybody in the Marine Corps is typically moving every 2 to 3 years. So there's a lot of people that I was once close with that we've kind of lost contact with, because maybe I was in San Diego and they moved to the DC area and I moved to North Carolina or something like that. But the other thing that would happen is a lot of people that I haven't seen in many years have kind of crawled out of the woodworks and said, hey, I've seen you post about investing in apartments. I'm interested. And, a lot of former colleagues or, Marines that I've worked with at different duty stations have invested with us because they've seen that shift, and they've seen what we've been doing. Of course, it's not just changing your profile. You have to do a little bit more to put it out there. A lot of, our marketing strategy involves a lot of social media, especially LinkedIn. And they're seeing it. They're seeing what we're doing on LinkedIn. They're seeing what we're doing on Instagram, and they're reaching back out and like, hey, Brian, I haven't seen you in a long time, but I'm interested in apartments. Let's talk. So yeah, it's definitely helping. And the first step for me was, I was apprehensive. I mean, believe it or not, I was apprehensive to do it. Just that little change in my LinkedIn profile. It's like, okay, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to do it, and I did it. And actually probably 6 months later, I went back and I added, Marine Corps officer to the very end of it. But for a while, I took that completely out. So anyway, yeah.
It's funny you bring that. It's funny you bring that up. I had a kid I went to high school with who was like friends with, but not like very close with, reach out because, he's now doing, real estate and I'm doing it. And it's like, all these people that you used to know from, back in, that's 10 plus years ago now. Yeah. It's just interesting to see how that happens when you do put stuff out there and, kind of let your network know and reconnect with people and people that are interested. So yeah. I think it's really interesting. It's pretty funny to have those conversations too, to like see who's kind of ended up in the same kind of hemisphere that you're doing stuff in.
Yeah. And people end up self-selecting, when you make it known to the world that you're doing something, people who are interested will self-select, and especially people who you already have a relationship with. One of the books that, another book I really thought was hokey when I first read it is called The Alchemist. And it's a really quick read. It's about, a boy, maybe a young man on his life journey, trying to fulfill his purpose. But the first couple of times I kind of read it, like I said, I thought it was kind of hokey. And I remember picking it back up. And the author is actually Brazilian, and the book was originally written in Portuguese. And my day job in the Marine Corps, I'm a foreign area officer, and I'm supposed to maintain fluency in Spanish and Portuguese. So I picked that book back up because I knew it was a very simple book to read in Portuguese. But he talks a lot about making sure the world knows what you're up to, make sure the world knows. And and like I said, the first time I read it, it sounded really hokey, as if, me telling the world that I'm doing something isn't really going to help. But it turns out that, when you start advertising these things to the world, people notice, and they, like I just said, they self-select, and they'll come to you and say, hey, I'm interested in these apartments. I've heard you're doing that. How can I get involved? And the world is, like this book says, obviously it's a metaphor in the book, but that book actually really helped me to kind of push a little farther forward and chase that dream that I had. But anyway,
no, I think all that's really great. You touched on something earlier that I want you to expand on a little bit. You talked about, how you're trying to figure out how you could add value to other people. And I think that's always a big question people have, especially as they're getting into it. Like, okay, how do I get into, other people's spheres? How do I get educated? How do I learn? How do I find partners? How do I contribute to like get involved and make a name? And, I think everybody always has questions about that. So I'm curious, like how you've tackled that problem, what your self-discovery was like of like, hey, here's what I can contribute to these deals and these partnerships and things like that.
It started out slow. I got involved in a lot of, real estate forums and multifamily forums. And, at first I was the lurker, the guy who would just look at the read boards or whatever was placed in the chat. And I would just kind of try to, look for people who had the same questions I did and kind of read up. And, eventually, as I was scrolling through one of these boards one day, I saw a question that I could easily answer. I'm like, I know the answer to that. I just posted it, and, for a while that almost seemed like a drug to me. It was just like, I would post it, and then, people were like, hey, thanks, Brian. I appreciate that, and I started realizing more and more that, as I was going through these forums, there were a lot of questions that I could answer and could add value to. Some of these forums were, kind of general real estate forums, and I had a handful of single family properties that I had for a long time. And so I could answer questions about that. But the multifamily specific forums, I remember one time, starting to answer these questions that other people would post about. And then I came across a question that I didn't know the answer to. And I'm like, you know what? I bet you I can find the answer to that question. I'm like, it's a question that I have too. And instead of waiting for somebody else to post an answer, I dug through books and podcasts and what have you. And I got the answer to that question, went back and posted it. And for the next several weeks, that's what my MO was, is I would find a question that I didn't know the answer to and be like, I can find that. And I'd go out and I'd find the answer. And at first it was literally, on the Rod Cleve podcast, episode number 322, so-and-so says this, because I didn't want to be the pretender. I wanted to say, hey, this is where I'm getting the information, and I just listened to a podcast that has the answer to your question. Now, the truth was I saw their question and then I searched for a podcast that had the answer to the question and then I answered it. But really what started happening is, people in these forums started looking at me as somebody who knew more than the average beginner, I guess. And, slowly that turned into, a little more credibility, in one way I look at that as kind of like the blind leading the blind, because, I still hadn't done anything, but, slowly and surely I started building up the credibility and the track record to where I was able to attract other people in that group who were, also kind of the movers and shakers. And that's frankly where I met my, the first of the Four Oaks Capital guys that I met was in a group like that. And he was doing the same thing. He was answering questions and we realized, hey, this guy's been posting a lot. He's been answering a lot of questions. He's a smart guy. He's somebody that I want to talk to. And, we started talking and later on decided to collaborate on a few things. And then later on decided to partner. So, it was really, and oh, by the way, this all occurred over the course of like 6 to 8 months, so it wasn't, I'm going to start posting today and then tomorrow, all of a sudden, we have a property under contract. But it was just a slow process of, realizing that little by little, I can learn, I can get better. And, I needed to, looking back at it, I didn't realize at the time that would, kind of demonstrate my own credibility or build my own credibility. But, I think if somebody's looking for that, looking to add value, you've got to find forums in which you can actually add value and you can start building that credibility and your network.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the big things that people underestimate, especially when you're raising money from people, is the human element and that connection to it. And I think so often, so many people are so quick to build up their profile and their track record and their standing to seem bigger than they are or more official to try to raise capital. And I think if anybody can take away anything from your story in this podcast, it's that, people, the great thing about this country is people are willing to back early beginner. You don't have to have the greatest track record to raise money. Look at all these startups and things. And, oftentimes the person running the deal is more important than the deal itself. And people are willing to back younger people, more inexperienced people, but they don't want the person that's a pretender. And I think so many people are so quick to overinflate their actual achievements or what they're doing. And I think what your story is a great illustration of is just saying like, I'm not going to, I can add some value to somebody, who's 6 months behind, right? If you take the spectrum of knowledge or experience. You go 1 to 100 arbitrarily, right? 100 is you literally can't learn anything more. 1 is, literally nothing. You don't have to be at 100 to help the person at 1. And quite truthfully too, if you're at stage 1, you don't want someone that's at stage 100, because they're going to forget what it's like to be at stage 1, and they're going to not give you great advice, right? Like when I have questions for people, like right now, right? I started property management 4 months ago. I've probably spoken to 20, 30, 40 other managers. I'm not trying to find somebody that oversees 20,000 units because they're not going to have good advice for somebody that's managing 16 or 40. So for me, I'm trying to find the person that manages 200 units and has been doing this for 2 or 3 years. Now, I also want to put in the person that manages 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 that's been doing it for 5, 10, 15 years because I'm trying to scale to that. But I'm also looking for the person that's only slightly ahead of me because they're figuring out the problems I'm currently encountering. The problems that somebody has that is managing 5,000 units are not the problems that I'm having. And they're not going to remember what it was like to tackle those problems. And they may have never tackled those problems because they may have worked their way up through a 5,000 unit managed company and never had to, take on.
Didn't build it from ground up.
Exactly. So, I think when you are adding value, one, take stock of where you are and recognize what questions you can and can't answer, the people you can or can't help. 2, recognize that you can probably help people sooner than you realize because, if you have done it for 3 months, you're ahead of somebody else who just started tomorrow. You've been doing it for 3 years and vice versa. And 3, it's that, people love to just back honest, authentic, real people. So I think everything you just spoke about, everybody should really take to heart and probably go back and listen to it again.
Yeah. And there's a couple of things that brought up. I mean, with my podcast, the hardest part of the entire podcast is actually matching the 2 guests up. If I'm bringing an experienced person and an aspiring person, exactly what you said. I'm not looking for the guy with $1 billion in assets to help somebody who started yesterday, and so when I bring the occasional, guy with $1 billion worth of assets, I'm picking, the most advanced beginner possible, or potentially somebody with several, properties under their belt already, but
if you ever have somebody with $1 billion and you want somebody to ask questions, I will 100% come on and be the beginner. I will gladly do that. So just throwing that out there. But I think
I've had 2 up to now, and it's just they're actually phenomenal guests, But I mean, imagine that, they've been on probably hundreds of podcasts themselves, but it's just one of those things where trying to find that right delta between where, the beginner guy is and where the advanced guy is exactly it. And I think that's, make a really good point. The guy at the 100 oftentimes has forgotten what it's like to be at 2, 3, and 4. And their stories and lessons learned are going to apply a lot more to the guys who are at 80s and 90s than onesies and twosies. So. Yeah.
And that's why it's really interesting kind of to bring it back to when we were talking about like, the $3 million used to feel so big. And now it's like, I talk about $30 million deals like it's nothing. I have to consciously, like, when I talk about deals and numbers and depending upon who I'm talking to, I have to like select in my head what type of example deals I'm talking about. Am I talking about a 10 unit or am I talking about a 100 unit? Because sometimes you talk to the wrong person about a 100 unit property and it goes one ear and out the other because they instantly go 100 units, 100, $10 million. That's crazy. I can't even fathom that. I can't listen to this guy. But what I literally do is take the exact same thing I would be saying, but instead of 100 at 10 million,
take a 0 off.
10 units at $1 million or 10 units at 8, whatever it is, right? Just pro rata it. And that's not an easy concept to grasp, but it's something that I have to check myself when talking with people of like, okay, like how do you illustrate this? How do you communicate it effectively? And it's sometimes, even I forget, right? And I've only been doing this for 5 years. I'm only a few years removed from that. But like, even for me, it's sometimes tough to remember what it was like to do that first $3-4 million deal where it felt like this massive thing and crazy. And like, I could have never done it myself. And now it's like, it would be second nature. Like I remember when we were doing that deal, it was me, my mom, my cousin, this guy, Tom, one of our friends, and John. John was the most experienced. And during closing, he took a goddamn vacation and left us. And we're
Nice,
out there,
John.
out there doing due diligence, and we're like scrambling and like have no clue. And, I'm sure looking back, it was, crazy, but, we just felt like we had no idea what we're doing. And now you drop me in that same situation and I would be like, oh, okay, we're doing this today, or we're doing that today. And it's no big deal. So it is tough sometimes to like remember what it's like. So, if you're listening to this and you're newer or the more experienced, like just try to remember, like try to reverse engineer where the other person is coming from, and like don't get overwhelmed or don't get frustrated with the other person if there's too big of a disconnect, because sometimes it is tough to bridge that gap.
Yeah. And the other thing, I mean, when you're looking at that guy with the $1 billion portfolio, also realize that he had to start somewhere. I mean, that's really what has helped me a lot. When I brought the guy with the $1 billion portfolio on, he was first to mention that, that started with my first deal. And when I went to my first deal, he talked about how he struggled with his first deal, and a lot of times you look at the gap between you and it seems insurmountable, but
was that Swapnil, by the way?
It was Michael Becker.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So,
you should have, have you ever had Swapnil on yours?
Not yet.
Ahead of NetU Capital? He was on ours. He was good. He'd be good to have on.
Yeah. I apprend an introduction if you would.
Yes. Happy to do it.
Definitely.
But yeah, I think it's, it's an interesting conversation when you do it. And I think it's, kind of coming back to the, the value prop piece, just kind of being really self-aware of who you are and what you bring to the table, and just understanding how you fit in and finding the right people, I think is really understated.
Yeah.
Was there anything that, because I think understanding your knowledge level is one thing, but like, we talked about this a little bit, but it's like, okay, there's all these elements to the deal. How did you take stock of yourself of like, okay, here's the parts of the deal that I'm going to be responsible for because it fits in with what I'm good at or what I enjoy or what I think I can be the best at right now? How did you go through that process of like self-evaluation and figuring it out, or are you still going through it?
It's a work in progress. It always is. I mean, at the beginning, I have 2 degrees in math, right? So naturally, I thought the numbers would be the easiest. I'll be the deal analyst because I can do numbers, I can do spreadsheets. I understand, that garbage in equals garbage out probably better than the average person does, right? Sensitivities analysis, things like that, are just things that naturally make sense to me because, it would do stuff like that. But, along the lines, what really impacted my role in the company wasn't my skill set. It was more my time. Prior to COVID, I was going to the Pentagon 5 days a week, and you walk in, you stick your cell phone in a lockbox and you don't see it again until you walk out, so it's one of those things where I was not accessible. I wanted to be the acquisitions guy, and I wanted to be the asset manager. And I think my personality and my strengths really were probably best suited for that role out of the 4 of us. But because of my time restraints, I couldn't do that. So, I fell back to something that I really like doing, and that's, educating. I've always enjoyed teaching other people, helping other people. And so, now recently my approach has been trying to help others learn more. And in so doing, we're attracting more and more people to our brand. We get people who are, who want to be the syndicators, who want to be the apartment investors, and who want to be the deal sponsors. But a lot of times what's happening is, as we're walking them through that process and trying to help them out, a lot of them are saying, hey, so I heard you guys have this deal. Can I invest? So it's really lending itself to, a lot of win-win scenarios where, we're trying to help other people get their first deals. And a lot of these people will invest with us. And if they don't, that's fine too. But, a lot of them are asking, hey, I've got my SDIRA, I've got, a little extra money here or there or whatever. Can I invest with you? So that's more what I'm doing right now. So a lot of what I do is, based around providing, value in terms of education. That's the podcast, it's the blogs, and we're building a kind of a course to walk people through the steps of the syndication process.
Awesome. Love it. I do want to be respectful of time, so we're going to wrap it up there. We'll have to have you back on in the future because this was amazing. So Brian, thank you so much for coming on. I know we've mentioned a couple of things, but if you can run through all the different places people should check out where they can follow you, connect with you, learn more about you, where can they do all that?
Most active on LinkedIn, so that's probably the easiest place to reach out to me. And then Diary of an Apartment Investor is the podcast, and the website for that is diaryofanapartmentinvestor.com. Companies 4 Oaks Capital and 4oakscapital.com. We're super simple. We like to take the name of things and add the .com on the end for our website. So that's where you can find us best. But LinkedIn, hit up our websites, listen to our podcast, and that's the best way to learn more about us and reach out to me.
Beautiful. Guys, definitely go do all of those, especially the podcast. It's really enjoyable. We'll have a link to all that stuff in the show notes, so definitely go check it out. But thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of the podcast. If you are not already subscribed, it would mean the world to John and I if you would do so. And if you are, please send it to someone that would get a tremendous amount of value from this episode. Brian, once again, thank you so much for coming on, man. This was great.
Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.